Good afternoon. Welcome to our first World Leaders Forum of 2023, where we are welcoming His Excellency, Ambassador Csaba Kőrösi, President of the 77th Session of the United Nations General Assembly. I am Courtney Smith, Dean of the School of Diplomacy, and it is my pleasure to welcome you here, both in person and those of you joining us online. My warm greetings to our guests, the President of the General Assembly, our own University President, Dr. Joseph Nyre, our University Provost, Katia Passerini, other members of the Executive Cabinet, members of our Board of Advisors, also fellow deans, faculty, alumni, and in particular, our students. Seton Hall's mission is to empower our students to make a difference in the world. And one of the ways we do that at the School of Diplomacy is creating opportunities for our undergraduate and graduate students to interact, to learn from distinguished practitioners who are active in the field, such as our guest today. This is the second time we've honored President of the General Assembly, and it continues a tradition that we've had. We've had 7 Nobel laureates, 3 UN Secretary Generals, and 4 US ambassadors to the UN, just to mention a few examples. This reflects not only our long-standing connections to the UN community, but also our commitment to preparing our graduates to build peace and foster social justice. Leading our university in this mission of servant leadership is Dr. Joe Nyre, the 21st president of Seton Hall. He frequently speaks about the power of place to change destinations and transform lives, and we are fortunate to have him with us this afternoon to offer a welcome. Dr. Nyre?
Well, it's a privilege and an honor to host Ambassador Kőrösi. Not since the UN was founded has it faced such a diverse array of humanitarian needs, security issues, and pressing priorities. On Tuesday, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists issued its annual reading of the Doomsday Clock. You may already know, but the clock is a metaphor for the likelihood of man-made worldwide disaster. The clock now stands at 90 seconds, the closest it's ever been to a global catastrophe. This was due largely, but not exclusively, to the war in Ukraine, and there are many reasons the clock has moved forward, including climate change and a looming threat of global health crises. As President of the General Assembly, Ambassador Kőrösi has been tireless in his efforts and advocacy for greater implementation of the UN commitments and our ability to collectively overcome the world's greatest challenges. He is here to share progress in alleviating human suffering and addressing the world's most pressing issues. And he's here because Seton Hall has a vital role to play in these endeavors. I often reflect on the great theologian Timothy Radcliffe, who said, "When faced with fundamentalism, teach people to think." Since 1856, our university has done more than simply teach and learn. We ask the big questions, and we develop answers. We engage across our differences to identify issues and to find solutions. And we are committed to something greater than ourselves. And we teach our students to animate the commitment through diplomacy, through law, nursing, the health sciences, education, the seminary, and many other fields of endeavor. The ambassador's visit is a great gift to us all. I'm grateful to welcome him and to thank him for his generous blessing of his time, his insights, and his wisdom. Mr. President, thank you. Thank you for being with us, and God bless you all.
Thank you, Dr. Nyre. There may be some in the room who might not be as familiar about the role of President of the General Assembly. So I wanted to just say a few words about the scope of the work of our guests today. The first Secretary General of the UN, Trygve Lie, actually thought of that position as a consolation prize. The role that he really wanted was to be the first President of the General Assembly. Now, when I tell you about the challenges and complexity of the role that our guest is in, you may wonder, why was he thinking that? But that's what Trygve Lie had in mind some 77 years ago. Why is it such a complex and challenging job? Well, you have to understand the General Assembly. The General Assembly is unique among international organizations. It's the only one that has these two characteristics at the same time. It's universal in membership, and any issue can be on its agenda. Okay? So you have 193 members in the General Assembly. Every single country in there has its own interests and needs. At the same time, they're advancing positions that are a constant balance between what the international realities are and what the domestic political considerations are at home. And when they're having these conversations, they are talking about the most challenging issues we face: climate change, the war in Ukraine. These are issues that are on the UN's agenda because they couldn't be solved elsewhere. When you hear me talk like this, I often wonder, so given all that, it's not all that surprising that the General Assembly fails to act sometimes. But what's really remarkable to me is that the General Assembly does act, and it acts on important issues. And the reason that it is able to act, and to act with a lot of agreement among its members, is because someone has helped guide, shepherd those negotiations. And most often, that person is the President of the General Assembly. Now, it's my pleasure to welcome a good friend and colleague now, Ambassador Laszlo Molnar, who is going to introduce our guest and highlight how our guest is prepared for the challenges I just described. Ambassador Molnar is a former Hungarian ambassador to the UN, and he has worked with the President of the General Assembly throughout their careers. He is currently serving as a visiting scholar in our school, and I'm grateful to him for helping make the connection that made today possible. Ambassador Molnar.
Let me look for a little help here. Ladies and gentlemen, I could go into great lengths by drawing parallels between Ambassador Kőrösi's career path and mine as colleagues in the Hungarian Foreign Service for almost 2 decades. Instead, I will confine myself to highlighting only 2 things. The first is that, as his fellow countryman, at least I know how to pronounce his name correctly. Second, having the pleasure of knowing him for such a long time, I got an early opportunity to realize how relentlessly he has been working on turning his personal conviction into reality. It was more than a decade ago when he, as the top Hungarian diplomat in New York, held 2 elected positions at the UN, enabling him to position the importance of sustainability as Vice President of the 67th UN General Assembly, as well as the co-chair of the intergovernmental process, the UN Open Working Group on Sustainable Development Goals. As the most recent example, let me recall here the period directly preceding his current position. For over 7 years, he served as the Director of Environmental Sustainability in the office of the former President of Hungary, supporting the President as a member of the high-level panel on water, and also in the framework of the Water and Climate Leaders panel. I believe all these titles that I just mentioned or listed of his previous positions speak for themselves, testifying both to his personal credo, the crucial importance of sustainability for our future, as well as his professionalism and dedication to promote his this noble cause. Making his vision statement available a year ago, it was in February last year, Ambassador Kőrösi made it clear to all that the same crucial and consequential issues were going to be at the heart of his future work as well, if elected to his current position. In light of the fact that the half-term overview of Agenda 2030 will take place in September this year, I am sure that Ambassador Kőrösi would also welcome constructive new ideas from our upcoming discussion with him today. This is why I would like to encourage our students to focus on a straightforward, factual assessment and to be critical in their comments and questions addressed to him on what is not functioning and why, what is missing from the system, including not only the lack of financial resources, which is a kind of obvious, it's always there, but other factors as well. For example, in science, in institutions, strategies. And who else, if not our students, the aspiring new generation of diplomats, especially multilateral diplomats, would be better placed to go beyond the old normal for the sake of a genuine transformation of the United Nations. So without further ado, let me present you Ambassador Csaba Kőrösi, the President of the 77th session of the UN General Assembly, whom I am looking at without any doubt that he is the right man in the right place and at the right time, and not only in the UN, but right here and right now too. Ambassador Kőrösi.
My dear friend Laszlo, Ambassador Molnar, thank you much indeed for your generous and kind words. President Nyre, Dean Smith, thank you much indeed for the invitation. Thank you very much indeed for having the opportunity to be with you today and perhaps launching a kind of brainstorming together. What shall we do with this world? What are our main challenges? Let's start first with that. If we see the challenges, then we can figure out where to go, how to go. These are the 5 big issues I would like to invite you to consider. The great acceleration, you may know, situation at present, the new chapter in history we are, what is the new UN role, and what could be expected from our joint thinking and maybe our joint work. So let's jump into the middle. The great acceleration. I'm putting it forward to you because most of you might have seen already these graphs produced about 20 years ago and then upgraded from time to time. These are some very characteristic measurements. On the left side of the chart, you see socioeconomic trends of humanity for 250 years. Starting from how our population grew, how our economies grew, how our water consumption grew, and so on and so on. There you can see something very interesting. Each and every chart is indicating that something has happened in the middle of the last century. From there, the curve goes up exponentially. If you look at the right side of the chart, these are the trends of the Earth system. Though it's a little bit different, but you can also trace a similarity between the two. The reason is our activity. The result can be shown on the Earth system. So that's what was a kind of scientific novelty some 20 years ago, mostly shared, discussed by scientists. At that time, it did not come through into the political discourse too much, but it was pretty much available in the scientific environment. But where are we now? From the field of science, field of theories, we arrive to the actual situation today. Unfortunately, we got what we foreseen. Wars. Today we have 27 armed conflicts going on in the world. The worst and biggest one is in Ukraine. Unfortunately, since the Second World War, we never had this high number of armed conflicts. So instead of taking the long-time peace dividends, now we are marching into a very dangerous direction. Global inflation surge. As we came out of the COVID crisis, as we try to sort out some of the consequences, economic, financial consequences of the COVID crisis, and as the impact of the war in Ukraine factored in, today the global inflation rate is 9%, but that's an average. In some countries, it's well over 70%. Food crisis. You may know that Ukraine and Russia provide jointly about 35 to 38% of the global grain exports. When these countries are at war, and at the beginning of the war everything was frozen, there was a huge shock on the international markets. And actually, because of the unsustainable way of development and producing food, well before the Ukrainian war, food prices started going up. And then it really skyrocketed. Today, we have 345 million people in the world who are threatened in their themselves or their livelihoods with access to enough and sufficient quality of food. Many of them, tens of millions, are now very, very close to the worst stage of famine. Actually, this 345 million is a jump as a number up from 135 million in 2019. Just 3 years' time, more than 200 million plus. Energy crisis. Due to the consequences of the war in Ukraine and due to the economic war that unfolded afterwards and in the meanwhile, electricity and gas prices in Europe within a couple of months jumped up 15-fold. Just imagine, if your economy is containing the price of energy about 6 to 7% in the final products, and the price of energy is jumping up 15-fold, what will be the final result on the economy? But there was other impact of the Ukrainian war and the energy crisis, which was caused by the war, that investments into the cleaner energy technologies also started jumping up. In 2022, the total sum invested into the clean power production went up to $1.4 trillion. It has never been that high, and it is growing exponentially. Discussions about energy sovereignty started coming to the forefront. Debt crisis. Partly, a part of the sovereign debts are coming actually from many, many years, some countries, in the case of some countries, for many decades. But what the COVID crisis caused, actually, is a huge surging of sovereign debts. Now 76 countries in the world are on the verge of financial collapse or a serious insolvency. 76 countries is more than 1/3 of the countries in the world. There is also a very significant data that just the debt service in the most vulnerable countries within 1 year jumped up by 35%. So obviously, if we don't touch this system, many countries will go bankrupt, with all financial, economic, and social consequences. Ineffective or slow climate action. You may know that in Paris we agreed, 193 countries, that we would like to keep the global surface temperature rise below 2 Celsius, but hopefully below 1.5 Celsius. The difference between the two seems almost negligible, half a Celsius. But if you take the impacts, it's basically the double because it's exponential. Now the bad news is that though we have the agreements, we have some programs, we have national implementation plans, our emissions are still on the rise, and we are on the path of 2.6 Celsius by the end of this century. It's a death row for a number of nations. According to the WHO, between 2030 and 2050, climate change is expected to cause approximately 250,000 additional deaths per year. It's a city. Water crisis. It's not the future, it has started in all three forms: droughts, floods, and pollution. Too little, too much, or polluted water. By 2040, more than 40% of the globe will be facing very serious water shortages. Altogether, about 40% of the needs will not be covered according to the present knowledge and according to the present technologies and present amount of fresh water available. And those 40% deficit will come mostly in the countries which are suffering already from the lack of water. In those countries are produced 40% of the grain we are consuming today. Today, there are 4 billion people, it's half of the humanity, who are experiencing, at least for 1 month in a year, very serious water shortage. Economic slowdown. After the very quick rise of the economies coming out from the COVID-19 pandemic, now there is a slowdown, partly due to the consequences of the war in Ukraine. If we are lucky, the global economy still can grow by 1%, but it means that in many, many countries it will be recession. Increased danger to human rights in time of conflict. As I mentioned, we have 27 full-fledged armed conflicts, and according to the experience, when it comes to harsh conflicts, human rights are usually pushed to the background. And it is happening on the 75th anniversary of the adoption of the Universal Declaration of the Human Rights. Stagnation in securing women's rights. Can we make a transformation in the world if half of humanity is not guaranteed in their rights? Can the labor market function well if half of humanity is deprived from being part of the labor market? Just look at what is happening in Afghanistan. There is hardly any freedom, hardly any right left with women and girls that has not been banned or taken away already. Increasing forced displacement. Just last year, 100 million were added to the number of increased forced displacement because of conflicts or because of violence in many countries. It is not the number of the migrants. If you put together the forced displacement and the migrants, now it's more than 350 million. In the forthcoming 15-20 years, due to climate change, due to the impact of climate change, due to some economic reasons, this number may go up to 500 to 600 million. It's almost twice the population of the United States. How the UN is weathering in these conditions? Well, it's a big challenge. UN is suffering from all those big challenges, big crises, which were mentioned a couple of minutes ago. In the UN, you have a difficult atmosphere. You have 193 countries, as it was said, with 193 sets of interests, sometimes expressed in a very diagonal way, setting one against the other when geopolitical divide is growing. There is a general feeling of mistrust among some member states, among groups. And when there is a mistrust, there is usually a declining willingness to find joint solutions on the multilateral ground. But where we are now then? I think we are in a new chapter of history. We haven't given a name to this chapter yet, but characterized by a permanent, interconnected crisis. We don't know for how long it will last, but for the time being, unfortunately, it's a permanent crisis. It is characterized by the weakness of global governance, of global common goods, at the time when we are seeing challenges coming from that weakness, and at the time when the geopolitical divide is growing. As a consequence, we are also witnessing the weakening global crisis management mechanism. In Europe, for example, you can see the almost complete decomposition of the security architecture which has been created in the last 40, 50 years. So, we are now in this situation. You have two avalanches, one from right, the other from left, and you are in the middle. You are there where these two will meet. One of them from the geopolitical conflicts, the other one from the challenges of the non-sustainable way of development. So this era might be characterized by a potential chain reaction of crises, combination of geopolitical, social, environmental. In this era, there's a growing probability of rapid, massive breakdowns. But on the other hand, there is a ray of hope. We never had in the history such a fast scientific and technological development. It is so fast, so quick, that it is capable to overwrite and override existing systems. Just think about what we are witnessing in the field of IT, artificial intelligence, on the field of health, the messenger RNA technology, which has been developed to fight COVID, is a completely new direction of protecting health. We are very, very close to a breakthrough in quantum computing and fusion energy. You may say that this is fine, but what will it bring to the Sahel? The question is very right. As it looks for the time being on the short run, probably the differences of development between the high-income countries, technologically advanced countries, and the technologically less advanced countries might be growing. And this is not something what we would like to see, but it's going to happen probably. So what is the UN role in this case? Now I'd like to invite you to express your opinion. Please take your phone. Type www.menti.com, and if you are there, put in the code 1202 1440. Should I repeat the code? 1202 1440. And the question you might be seeing on your screen is, what would be the most important steps to mitigate a complex crisis? Please type one or two words, what you think the most important would be, according to your opinion. Okay, we have about 50 answers already. Anybody else to send the answer yet? Okay. I see the keywords from the very outset is cooperation. Another is trust, negotiations, unity, empathy, negotiations, technology. All these are really key pillars. Let me build on what you have said, negotiations. Because now we have to design a new world. We can only design this new world if we bring together our knowledge, if we come together, if we try to make a deal. And that deal is not done on the battlefield. That deal can only be done in negotiating rooms, in boardrooms of companies, boardrooms of NGOs, or here, in the universities. So, from these answers, what we saw, I can reconfirm to you that the UN is mirroring the challenges and processes and affairs out there in the world. But those challenges actually encompass all the three key pillars of the United Nations: peace and security, development, and human rights. And the worst news is that they do it at the same time, all together. But however, due to the cooperation, what you put forward, the work is not impossible. The UN is not only mirroring the affairs in the world, the UN in many, many cases is showing the way as well, setting goals, setting agreements. Now, let me quote a famous American, Isaac Asimov. No sensible decision can be made any longer without taking into account not only the world as it is, but the world as it will be. So you are getting prepared now not to fix this world. You are getting prepared to fix your world in a couple of years' time. That will be different from this one. I hope it will be not much worse than what we have today. Many of you who are from this country, you are a hockeying nation. Let me paraphrase it. In the hockey, you don't go where the puck is. You go where you think the puck will be when you arrive. So we are in that Anthropocene era. It's a new historic chapter of the Earth, which started, as you saw on the charts, somewhere between the 50s and the 70s of the last century. And now it's unfolding. We have already the prototype of the Anthropocene era crisis. We call it COVID-19, and all the consequences which came with that. But are we up to the tremendous responsibility of being the main shaper of life on this globe? It's a big question. Probably not without some change. Okay, let's take your phone again. So the question is, what would be the most important steps to mitigate complex crises? Concrete steps. What do you suggest? So the exact question now, what chances do you see for the transformation during the time of crisis? And I see now a very big majority is given to somewhat hopeful for transformation. And I'm very glad that the last one, no chance of transformation at all, has garnered only one vote. Thank you much indeed. I also belong to that group. It's good to see the challenges, but it's good to be sure that we have to do something. It wouldn't come cheap, it wouldn't come easy, but we have to do it. Let's go then to the General Assembly. The motto of my presidency when I assumed office was, and still is, solutions through solidarity, sustainability, and science. When we talk about solutions, when we talk about those big changes, when we talk about those big challenges, when we go for cooperation, what you indicated, when we see all those many, many hurdles among countries and in front of all countries, we try to organize our world along two avenues. One is crisis management, the other one is transformation. Let's look into the crisis management first. What does it mean in layman terms? It's short-term survival for all our communities on this earth. In the field of finances, supply chains, health, food, energy, and water. All of them are immediately threatening some of our communities. Crisis management in terms of UN, in terms of the General Assembly, means prevention or preventing an immediate breakdown. You remember I said 76 countries are on the verge of the financial meltdown. And in some cases, when crisis is already there, We cannot avoid it. At least we need to soften the impacts of the ongoing crisis. But what transformation means? Transformation is a longer-term set of measures for survival and well-being, because it's not enough to make sure that I can live until the age of I don't know how much, but I have to make sure that you and your children will have at least the same options and choices what I had when I was small. Now it is not guaranteed. We have to make it. When we talk about transformation, we need to look at the aspects of policies, institutions, legal changes, and to pursue some processes. Now, to ease a little bit the questions, you surely heard many times, you saw many times the abbreviation of SDG. Ambassador Laszlo Molnar also mentioned that I was a little bit of culprits of creating those SDGs. The question would be, if you go to the Menti, when was the first phrase or first abbreviation of SDG first used? 21st century, 20th century, 19th century, 17th century, 16th century. Okay, it seems to me that 20th century is gaining power. Okay, I have to tell you it was a joke. But a serious joke. Let's see the next slide. Do you know where is it coming from? It's a partiture composed by Johann Sebastian Bach. The same was applied by Friedrich Handel. And do you know what does it mean? Soli Deo Gloria. In Latin. Glory to God only. I'm very proud that we created actually the same abbreviation, though the meaning is a little bit different. Though as a believer, I still believe that that he was right, or they were right. Now let's go back to our policies and our transformation agenda. How to advance transformation in policy or decision-making terms? First and foremost, if we want this world to be controllable, to be predictable, guided by policies that is serving the current and future generations, we have to reconfirm our guiding goals. The SDGs, climate goals, energy transition goals, goals on water, food, biodiversity, health, and disaster risk reduction. It's good to remind ourselves that we have a good set of goals, very transformative goals, just we need to implement them. The second, we need a science-supported implementation as well as a science-based validation of the transformation. What does it mean? It sounds very, very Latin, very, very strange. You may know that the SDG implementation is going on, at least principally, in all countries. And member states of the United Nations are coming together every year on the so-called HLPF, High-Level Political Forum, and giving a kind of account what has been achieved. How are they progressing on the implementation of the SDGs? Now there is a very strange picture. When you listen to the voluntary national reports, you have an impression that almost everything is fine. Beautiful reports, beautiful results, progress after progress. So you can be reassured. Good, we are on track. When you look into the global data, you have a very different picture. It's a very alarming picture. How come? Where does it come if not from the countries, if not from us? Who is doing here something else? The matter of the fact is that we need to be more honest. The second, we need to create a more science-based evaluation mechanism of what has been implemented. It applies also to the data processing, data setting, and evaluating the data. The next, we need a renewed economic thinking. We call it going beyond GDP. You may remember where the GDP concept is coming from. When Simon Kuznets was commissioned by the government here in this country between the two world wars, he was commissioned to create an index that will help decision makers to prevent the next big economic crisis, depression. And he took into the consideration, as a foundation of his concept, some of the work which was developed in France, Germany, and England after the First World War. What was in the basement of this concept was a military consideration. In a given period of time, in a given country, how much raw material the given country or company can process, produce as a military hardware, and send to the front line. That is in the core of the concept. Simon Kuznets warned many times that his index is very indicative, very good, particularly for measuring the material flow. But it has never been created to measure development. Still, most of our governments use GDP as the most important basic component for measuring development. And even during the election campaigns, one of the key figures always for either in the hands of the opposition or the hands of the party in office is how are we with the GDP growth? We have no problem with the GDP. That's fine. That should be part of the future thinking and future indicator. But sustainable development means that we have basically 5 types of capitals. Social capital, personal or human capital, natural capital, built capital, infrastructure if you wish, and financial capital. These 5 all together can give you the total picture, the total balance of how are you developing. Because if you're just interconnecting or interchanging one type of capital into another, but the overall balance is shrinking, you may have more money, but basically your wealth is decreasing. If you ask now whether or not we are making progress in transformation, the honest answer is we don't know. We may have some educated guesses, but we have no real, precise, evidence-based indicators or methodology of measuring sustainability transformation. It needs to be developed, and I hope a very serious work will be done later this year, and even if we don't finish it by September, we have to complete it by September 2024. It will be a revolution. We need a renewed social contract, or social contracts in our societies, at least 2. One social contract among generations, because whatever we decide upon today, or whatever we fail deciding upon today will have an impact on not only on this generation, but the generations to come. In the terms of climate, it's obvious, absolutely obvious. The same goes to some other areas like biodiversity, water, or health. The other type of social contract we need is among stakeholders. Because to make this huge transformation, what we described in the SDGs, or now what is being added upon by the so-called Our Common Agenda produced by the Secretary General, these are transformative agendas, basically trying to encapsulate all energies, all possibilities of the whole society. If a society has no agreement on where we are going, what are our goals, what kind of transformation are we going to do, then the concentration of capital, concentration of attention, of energies will not be there. That's obvious. And last but not least, I think we need to change a little bit our thinking and to add to the universal human rights, the universal human responsibilities. In each and every law school, including in this university, on the first grade you are taught that when you have rights, you have obligations. These two keep in balance the society. But do we really realize what kind of responsibilities do we have to the next generations? What kind of responsibilities do we share to make sure that this earth is going to be livable and the social conditions and political conditions on this earth will be conducive to a normal development? I think these two, the responsibilities and rights, should be closer connected. Let's look into some institutional changes, because it's not enough to change policies. We need to look into the institutional support system. Obviously, we are going to look at our international development financing system. These are the big development banks that are owned by governments. The same governments adopted the goals on sustainable development, the goals on climate, goals on biodiversity, health, and many others. But do all our MDBs, multilateral development banks, serve exactly the same goals? I'm not entirely sure. If there is a discrepancy, then we have to fix it. We need to establish or upgrade some of our institutions. As I mentioned earlier, in the UN as well, we need to create a support science-based sustainability transformation mechanism, because we have goals for sustainability transformation, but the evaluation mechanism, science-based evaluation mechanism, is mostly missing. So we are in a crossroad, as you see. There are two choices we can go. We can go for a world that will be good for you, and we can go to another direction that I'm not sure you will be very happy. In order to make this choice and to make the best choice, we need to find real game changers. To make sure that the goals will be achieved, to make sure that, for example, in the field of water and climate, we can make leapfrogging. The small changes are not making the deal any longer. In terms of legal affairs, let me offer to your kind attention a dilemma. It may sound laws versus goals. Traditionally, our societies were based on laws, rules, and we are very proud to announce that we are a rules-based society. And it has been always, for many, many, many years, centuries, that we were guided by rules, be them written rules, unwritten rules, moral rules, religious rules, but we knew that these are the rules. In the last 15 years, we started creating something else. We started creating goals, because we noticed that even if we follow most of the rules, what we created, including the laws, we still may go into some major crisis. So we started creating goals that are supposed to change the way of direction, the direction of our development. That was very much necessary. That's why we created SDGs. That's why we created biodiversity goals. That's why we created climate goals. But in most cases, our laws remain the same. So that's why you have now today more than 300 court cases going on against governments and some companies. Mostly civil society or activists or private persons are suing governments and companies for not obeying to the goals, to the political goals they were party of adopting it. Despite the fact that maybe legally everything is fine. So there is a discrepancy, what we need to address. It doesn't mean that we should give up the goals. The goals were created in order to save us, to help us saving ourselves. We need to upgrade some of our laws very soon as we can. So, very close to the completion of my talk, we need processes, we need negotiations, how to achieve all this in the United Nations. Now 16 negotiating processes are going on in the UN. 3 are still in the making. Let me just mention a couple of them which might be interesting for you. Since 1977, the first full-fledged UN conference on water will be held on the 22nd, 24th of March. It will be the Paris moment of water, if we do it right. In September 2023, we are going to have the SDG summit. We are halfway through, as we heard a short while ago, of the implementation of the Agenda 2030 program. We are off track, so we need to correct what has been done in a wrong way. We need to create the first ever in the life of the UN global digital compact. We are obviously living in a very, very new age, and the future must be sustainable and nature-based. If there is no sustainable future, then there is no future. So in order to create this sustainable future, we need to make it nature-based, digital, and socially sensible. The Global Digital Compact is designed, will be designed hopefully, to address all the discrepancies we find today in the digital sphere of cooperation. What would you consider a success in the United Nations, taking into consideration at least these 16 negotiating processes? Let's go to the last slide. How this Greek temple could stand and be solid, withstanding the harsh weathers. We need a clear vision in the forthcoming couple of months. What is at stake? What are the timeframes? What are the political responsibilities on various dimensions of transformation? We hopefully will need a new evaluation and validation methodology of implementation of sustainability transformation. Hopefully we'll be in the position of reconsidering the scientific support mechanism of the sustainability transformation, including game changers. I hope we will have at least an advanced thinking of the renewed economic approach of using our natural resources. I hope we will have a renewed financing logic, factoring in all the negative and positive externalities based on the all-value approach. I hope we are going to have a tangible progress on the Security Council reform process, which has been going on 17 years already without any major result. And today we have a dysfunctional Security Council. I hope we will recommit, member states will recommit to the nuclear non-proliferation, because it's very difficult to envisage a transformative future under the constant threat of a nuclear war. I hope there will be a gradual rebuilding of trust among member states, and if that all comes together, then you might be having a strengthened logic and role of multilateralism. You may say I'm a dreamer. I could be. I hope I'm not alone. Even if a part of it can be achieved and the rest can be carried over through other years in presidency, then I would like to leave you only with two invitations, two asks. Be part of transformation. And the second, be part of developing a scientific support to decision shaping. Thank you much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Oh, no, you can say. Thank you very much, President. That was, your remarks were sober, but inspirational at the same time, and we're very grateful. I think we have, he's graciously agreed to take some questions, and we have time for maybe one or two. Some have already been submitted by members of the audience, and so I'd like to begin by inviting Zoe Prin to ask her question. And there's a mic right next to you, Zoe, so everyone will be able to hear you. And you have a mic right there.
Ambassador Kőrösi, coming from a developing democracy and with a background in domestic environmental sustainability, how have these factors influenced your approach to the role as PGA?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
If I would only bring my immediate Hungarian background, then I would fail on the first day. On the first day of your presidency, you take an oath of office that you are not going to represent any particular interest or any country, and you are not going to take any instruction from any particular government. So if you run for this office, make sure you gather experience for many, many years, from many continents, many jobs, many fields of activities, because that will help. If you only would like to rely on one source, then it will be not enough.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, I would like to ask Nick Kimball to ask a question.
Thank you for your time with us, Ambassador. Truly a remarkable speech. My question is, during your tenure as President of the General Assembly, what would you like your greatest achievement to be?
Well, it's 1 year, as you know, and I just try to describe you what I would consider success, what we would like to achieve. If you want me to say it in one sentence, a transformation, a significant progress on the transformation, in terms of policy making, institutional backup, and scientific backup. I hope some of them were appealing to you enough that you can join us.
Thank you. Will do.
Thank you. Next, I'll do Jessica Ford.
Good evening, everyone. Ambassador Kőrösi, What needs to be done in order to fix the climate challenge faced specifically by small island developing states?
They are in fatal danger. If we are following the curve and following the path we are on, some of them may disappear in the early next century. That is something we cannot afford as humanity, as human community. As you may know, those who follow the climate policies are basically now put on 3 pillars: mitigation, adaptation, and financing. Mitigation means that we have to do everything possible to curb, reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, which is the prime responsible reason of the global warming. Adaptation means that those changes which are already programmed in, that will happen, including some certain degree of the sea level rise, can be survived in terms of freshwater supplies, in terms of agricultural lands preserved, in terms of protecting our coastlines in many, many ways. And the third one, which is supposed to support the first two, is financing. Now, what magnitude are we talking about? Back 10 years ago, roughly, in Copenhagen, we decided that the climate policies, international climate financing, should contain $100 billion per year to be transferred from richer countries to less affluent countries. That has never been achieved, despite the fact that it has been repeatedly said, and the implementation was supposed to be by 2020. The best result was last year, actually, when we achieved about $86 billion per year. Now, since the challenges, the potential damages are much, much higher than any time before, another dimension came in, the so-called loss and damage fund. So because of the ongoing climate change, which was mostly induced by the highly industrialized countries, much of the consequences, or some of the consequences, are felt in the less affluent countries, in the most vulnerable countries. Some damage is being done already. So there was an agreement in Sharm el-Sheikh 2 months ago that we create an international fund for loss and damage. If that comes to life, it will be far, far more and bigger than the $100 billion per year. It will measure trillions. It sounds good, but it is not that simple to implement. First and foremost, I still don't see who will take the checkbook and sign. The second, we don't have the mechanism yet. Who puts together the money? What will be the mechanism? What will be the mechanism of evaluation? And what will be the way for using the money, and what kind of projects are we going to use it? So the good news that we see the magnitude of the challenge. We have a framework agreement, which is very encouraging probably, and it was the prime request of the small island states. But there is still a long way to go and a lot of work to be done to make it really happen, make it impactful. It will take many years, I'm afraid.
Thank you.
Mr. President, we are very grateful for not only the insights that you offered us, but also the call to action that you gave to us and to our students. I want to thank you for visiting with us. And as a small token of the appreciation of the school and the university, I have just a small gift bag here so you'll remember your visit, because we certainly will remember your visit. So thank you for joining us today. And I also want to thank the members of the audience for joining us today, and especially our crew of student volunteers. This event would not have been possible without our students. So thank you all very much, and thank you again, Mr. President.
Thank you very much for having me.